Hi, everyone. Is this working? You can hear me now. Fantastic. Okay, and everyone, if you have a problem with your mic, I'll share mine. All right. Hi, everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome. I'm glad everyone's having fun. It's like such a nice vibe in here. I'm sorry to stop all of your wonderful conversations. I will introduce myself. I'm Melissa Goodman. Is there, like, weird sounds happening? Is it okay? Okay. Excellent. I'm the Executive Director of the Center on Reproductive Health Law and Policy here at UCLA Law School. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for this very important conversation, and I hope you stay for the fun reception afterwards. So please do that. It'll be in the atrium toward the front. I also want to thank our co-hosts for this event, the UCLA Law Critical Race Studies Program and the Center for Reproductive Rights. Woohoo! Thank you. I'm just going to do a really brief introduction because everyone here is incredible and I want you to listen to them and not me. But I just want to tell you a little bit for folks who are newer to us. The center is an independently funded think tank and research center, and we're developing long-term lasting solutions that advance reproductive justice and address the national crisis in abortion access. A really core part of what we do is help generate and amplify new ideas, new scholarship, new research that's directly helpful to advocates who are in legal and policy battles today, but also for longer-term transformational change, which we do believe is still possible. So that is where we are. We're also a hub connecting scholars, researchers, advocates, healthcare providers, policymakers, to connect folks to share knowledge, to strategize, and to really plug into each other's work across disciplines to maximize impact. And one of our goals, we have many goals, but one of them relevant today is to support a wider conception of reproductive and bodily freedom in state and federal constitutions. Something that's broader, more inclusive, more affirmative, and more useful to all, to everyone, and not just some of us, than the right that we had and lost in Dobbs. And another goal we have is to promote laws and policies that create actual access, autonomy, and justice, that we help build durable rights and equitable access to resources, that we dismantle oppressive systems so that people truly can decide if and when to parent, have resources they need to form families, and they can have safe and dignified pregnancy and birth experiences, and can actually raise families in thriving communities. And these are really the goals that animate the conversation that we're going to have today, to really confront the reality that we have never in this country had clear constitutional protections for people who decide to parent but who face significant challenges in pregnancy and birthing. The law, honestly, said as a lawyer who's tried to use the tool for good in many ways, the law has really, so far failed to sufficiently protect people from obstetrical violence, surveillance and criminalization of pregnancy, harmful restrictions on how and where a person births, growing pregnancy and care deserts in our country, and systemic racism care in our care that literally kills mothers and infants. And today's conversation is about working more to change that and how to build and better use the law as a tool for maternal health justice. So, with that, I am very excited to turn the conversation over to the very brilliant, award-winning, and very lovely journalist, Nina Martin, who is here with us today. Nina is a reporter and editor for the Center for Investigative Reporting, which comprises Reveal and Mother Jones. She has worked as a reporter and editor at numerous outlets, including ProPublica, San Francisco and Health magazines, the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, the Washington Post, the International Herald Tribune, and Baby Center. In 2017, while at ProPublica, Nina was the lead reporter on a very extraordinary series called Lost Mothers, which if you haven't read it, you must. And it really was examining maternal mortality in the United States and why the United States is the most dangerous affluent country in the world in which to give birth. And the ProPublica and NPR series sparked legislative change in Congress and some states and cities. And with that, I want to turn it over to you, Nina, with a question. Could you just tell us what moved you to do that investigatory series?
Thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm so happy to be here. So I was at ProPublica about 10 years ago, and ProPublica does impact journalism. So really pretty much not feature stories, not happy stories. I used to tell people all the time, my job is not to cover happy stories, I cover the bad things. And but the idea is that you're doing journalism with the to create impact. And I was their first sex and gender reporter, which again could be anything, like sex and gender. That's pretty much everything. But I decided to focus on women's health because that's what I had been doing in other jobs in the past. And at the time, people were thinking about that, and really a lot of the conversation was about abortion. And that was a problem for me because it was really hard to do impact journalism and do around abortion at that point, right? You couldn't change anybody's minds. People were really set in terms of how they approached abortion and repro rights in general. And so I was trying to sort of figure out how to do this thing, which ProPublica had never done before, and kind of approaching repro coverage in a different way. And in my desperation, I ended up at a couple of conferences that were reproductive justice conferences, and they blew my mind. And I met a number of people here, or the organizations that they represent at some of these conferences, and they blew my mind. And I think the thing that I first realized was, it was really the first time I had a true sense of issues outside of abortion that were really incredibly important to the lives of people in around, thinking about abortion is just really a moment in time, really in a lot of people's lives. Sometimes it's a long moment, and of course if you have trouble accessing abortion and you want an abortion, that's a horrible position to be in, as we've seen now for so many people, but then the rest of your life goes on, and it's all those other things that abortion or the lack of abortion affects, but that continue more broadly, and that's kind of what I wanted to do. And that took me to criminalization of drug use in pregnancy at first, and then where I met Farah, and then I kind of stumbled into maternal mortality. And, I was so lucky to work at a place like ProPublica that gave me the time and the resources and the help to understand an issue that a lot of people were not writing about in that way at that time, to really kind of do a deep dive into research and then start writing. It wasn't like there was a breaking news story and I had to chase the news story. And that grounding that I had was, such a privilege. But it results, that plus also working with NPR, which really amplified the work, made the work that we did on the Lost Mothers Project extremely impactful. And so in a way that, journalists dream of. I mean, it just never happens. I never thought it was going to happen in my lifetime to my journalism, and it was an amazing thing. And so there was 2018 and 2019, and there was all this money that Congress was, allocating, and organizations were doing things, and I suddenly it all came to a halt, screeching halt with the pandemic. And then as soon as the pandemic was incredibly disruptive, and as soon as the pandemic happened, then we started to see, then Dobbs happened. And then as soon as, we were just getting used to the horrors of Dobbs, if we can say that, then Donald Trump happened. So I've been really interested in trying to figure out how else to cover maternal health and the challenges and the disparities and the disruptions to maternal health at this moment in time, when so many of the resources that we had and ideas that we had and people that we had doing this work are sort of suddenly all gone. So with that, I would like to ask my fellow panelists to introduce themselves and take a little less time than I just did, maybe. Sorry. to introduce yourselves and talk about how you came to this work. So let's start at the end. So Farah.
Oh, gosh. Hey, y'all. I was very surprised. So my work began almost 18 years ago when I was pregnant with my oldest son, who is going to turn 18 a month from now. I was pregnant as a law student, and I would say that my trajectory towards working in this area, in particular maternal health, began with a shitty abortion. With an abortion experience that was not a positive one. Actually, I had attempted to self-manage an abortion. It didn't work because I used herbs. This is before I knew Francine's work. And so in the state of Texas, I had an abortion that was really crappy. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to repeat that experience. And so the next time I became pregnant, at that point, I felt like I was ready to parent. And as a student, was a Medicaid recipient, and it did not take me very long to realize that the Medicaid clinic that I was going to, I was not getting quality care there, and the people around me were not getting quality care. And so I dropped out of the Medicaid clinic, and because the state of New York covers midwifery care, I fought with the state of New York for a very long time to have a midwife attend my delivery at home. And, as fate would have it, we ended up having to transfer to the hospital, where I saw how she was deprived her agency, how I was deprived my agency, how when we crossed the threshold of the hospital, she said, I have admitting privileges here, but we're on their turf now. Things are going to be different once we're in here. And the care that I experienced there was violent. It was obstetric violence, and we didn't have that terminology for it. Actually, that terminology was just being coined in Venezuela. And we didn't really have access to that language at that point. But after that experience, and in the sort of shock of, I'm a law student, I'm getting this education about rights that we're supposed to have, and realizing that all of these things could go wrong after somebody had made the decision to bear and beget a child, and that they could be denied their agency and their autonomy and be made to feel helpless and small, the way that I was. In that moment, I knew it was my life's work to figure out how to make that not the case for other people. And even as a 1L law student, I remember hosting events like this one here, where the question was, how can we take the energy behind the sort of flourishing Park Slope birth, natural movement, and make it bear fruit for the Black and brown moms at the Medicaid clinic that I dropped out of. So that was what started me on my trajectory. I was lucky to eventually find National Advocates for Pregnant Women, where I started actually, once I became a lawyer, I continue that life's work to this day at If When How, where we provide legal services and legal advocacy to make sure that people are able to make decisions about their reproductive lives, chart the courses of their lives without facing state violence, without facing coercion or marginalization. We do that in a variety of ways. We provide legal services through a helpline. We do interesting litigation, which we're going to get to talk about, policy advocacy to create a legal landscape where people can make these decisions for themselves. But to me, I think for a lot of people who are led by the reproductive justice movement and those principles, the work is personal. Even if it's not from your own personal experience, it is from the people you know, the people you're in community with, the people you love. And that's, so that's my North Star, and that's why I'm here today.
Great, thank you.
So my name is Kiara Bridges, and is it on?
I'm not sure, is it?
Can you guys hear?
Yeah. We all each have to turn our
I
mics
tried
on.
to turn it on. I was denied. So my name is Kiara Bridges. I'm so happy to be here in conversation with everyone, and thanks to the organizers for bringing us together. And so I'm a law professor. I'm at UC Berkeley in the School of Law, and I'm a lawyer and an anthropologist by training. I have a JD and a PhD in anthropology, and I've always been interested in the discrepancy between law on the books and law in the world. And it's so funny. funny how you said the language of bear and beget. I remember being in law school and reading, Griswold versus Connecticut and reading Eisenstadt and looking at how the Supreme Court sort of described pregnancy as like a good thing for the pregnant person, a good thing for the pregnant person's family, a good thing for the nation. And it was so in diametrical opposition to the way that pregnancies are talked about when they are being instantiated by those who lack class privilege and race privilege and privilege of citizenship. So I was interested in how that discrepancy between law and the Supreme Court's jurisprudence and then law on the ground looks. And so that kind of led me to my first book, which is called Reproducing Race. And Reproducing Race is an ethnography of an obstetrics clinic in a public hospital in New York City. I call the hospital Alpha Hospital, but if you read one page of that book, and if you've been in New York City for any more than 5 minutes, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The overwhelming majority of the patients who receive their prenatal care from Alpha Hospital are poor. All of them are Medicaid except one during my time, Medicaid insured except one person during my time there, and they are disproportionately people of color. And I was interested in how racism and sexism and misogyny and classism and xenophobia and ableism sort of showed up in a clinic that was ostensibly intended to help vulnerable people have safe pregnancies and give birth to healthy children. And what I witnessed was that it's really, really hard, as you well know, hard to maintain your dignity. It's hard to hold on to your autonomy. It's hard to have your humanity recognized when you are poor and pregnant and relying on the state to provide what a lot of countries believe to be just a basic human right, healthcare. I mentioned that the title of the book is Reproducing Race, and when I would present the book the book was published in 2011, so for the past 14 years, people would say, okay, cool, yeah, you're right, people don't have dignity, they don't have humanity, they don't have autonomy, but is this about race? Or rather, isn't it about class? It's because these folks are poor. And I said, well, actually, it's both and. And so that led me to my current book project, which intends, so the title of the book is Expecting Inequity, How the Maternal Health Crisis Affects Even the Wealthiest Black Americans. It's not available for pre-order yet, but give me some time. But it'll be out in early 2026. And so essentially what this book does is chart the way that racism shows up in the lives of wealthy Black Americans, how racism shows up in the lives of people who have been imagined to have escaped racism's reach. And I'll end just by noting that the fact that racism shows up in the lives of even wealthier Black Americans is demonstrated by the statistics showing that racial disparities in maternal mortality and morbidity persist across income levels. So a lot of folks know that Black folks are more likely to die than their white counterparts from pregnancy-related causes. Some people, even though the statistics, 3 to 4 times as many Black folks are going to die from a pregnancy-related cause versus their white counterparts. But a lot of folks don't know that statistic persists across income levels. And so that means that I have this JD, I have this PhD, I own my home, I have tenure, I have all this class privilege. And the way I explain it to my students is that my office neighbor, who's a very nice lady, also a law professor, also tenured, she probably also owes her, I'm still 3 to 4 times as likely to die from a pregnancy-related cause than my office neighbor at Berkeley Law. And so, I can't purchase an escape from racism in the U.S. And so that's what Expecting Inequity endeavors to do.
Thank you. Yay. Hillary.
Definitely let us know when you can pre-order the book. Let's see, find us on. Hi, I'm Hillary Schneller. I am a litigator at the Center for Reproductive Rights, where I have been for over 10 years now, and I really came to this work through abortion work and through abortion litigation. It's the thing that always made me angry and is sort of a very fundamental aspect of people's equality, and I think now I think of as about pregnant people's personhood. I learned very far into this work that both my grandmothers had illegal abortions and then, had other children before and after, and so I think the same people, right, go through each of these pregnancy experiences and can be, as talked about, very different life experiences depending on who you are. And in my work at the center kind of has really tried to bring those together, to not just do the abortion work as we try to rebuild a better right to reproductive autonomy, and one that actually includes affirmative protections for decisions to become pregnant, to stay pregnant, and have a healthy pregnancy and parent children in safety. So I think I worked on the Dobbs case, and I think that obviously was a seismic change in our constitutional landscape. It also, didn't change a ton about protections for pregnancy beyond abortion because they haven't really existed. I think Dobbs, though, kind of normalizes or further normalizes the idea that pregnant people are not to be trusted decision makers. So as we sort of reestablish these rights, we kind of have to make sure we are thinking about it beyond abortion, beyond the moderate protections that Roe had, and including decisions about pregnancy beyond abortion and protecting maternal health, I think is critical to doing that better this time around. So I will pass it on.
Thank you. Okay. So for the personal to where I am today, the personal started when I was pregnant. And when I was pregnant, I got a phone call at work that said I needed to come to the clinic immediately and get this medication because I had a urinary tract infection or something like that. And I thought, as a typical black woman who values her job, it will wait until I get off of work. And after work, I went to the pharmacy to pick up the medication, and having always been a reader, I read the inside of it, and it said, do not take if you're pregnant. Mm-hmm. So I went to the pharmacist, who happened to be a woman, and I said, this says don't take if you're pregnant. And she was like, yeah. I said, I'm pregnant. And she was like, what the hell? So both, she and I both got on the phone with the person who had ordered this medication, and he insisted that I was in a gray zone and I could take the medication. So he got fired. And it was at that point that I set out to find a midwife. I was living in Los Angeles, and at that point in time, I don't know if you heard of Lola Coleman.
Of course we did. Of course we know Lola Coleman.
Yeah, that's who I found.
You're so lucky.
So, yeah. So I found a midwife, and that did not put me on this road right now, but it planted a seed for it. So fast forward, many years later, there was another woman, Catherine Hall Trujillo, who came to town and said, we're bringing the birthing project to Los Angeles. And she called it the Underground Railroad to New Life. Mm-hmm. And at that point in time, I was on the radio, KPFK, doing a program called Family Tree. She came on Family Tree. She talked about this birthing project and said, Jan, I need you to start a baby bunch. A baby bunch of 10 women who mentor 10 expectant women until the baby is 1 year old. This is a vulnerable time. So we started a baby bunch under the mentorship of Catherine Hall, and those women who started that baby bunch started an organization called Black Women for Wellness. So that is how Black Women for Wellness started. Well, as we started out as a baby bunch, we knew very little about 501c3s and nonprofits. Our family said, y'all need some help with this mentoring thing. Because what we found as we were mentoring, it was actually 6 of us as opposed to 10. Between the 6 of us, we had 23 women we were mentoring. And our family was like, y'all need some resources because you all are taking all of ours. So we applied for funding with what was then called the Los Angeles Women's Foundation. And they were like, this is great work. Give us your 501c3 and we'll fund you. And then we said, what's a 501c3? Right? So, and that's how we started that 501c3 called Black Women for Wellness, right? And we started very much a program. right? And it was helping expectant women. We also had a program called Sisters at 8. Sisters at 8, we had a woman. She was very mature demographic. She had a PhD. She worked at a local health center. She had a husband. She had a house, and she got pregnant, and she was treated very badly, and she lost a baby. At that point in time, about 70 or 80 women were coming to Sisters at 8. It was at Doolin's, which is on Crenshaw. And so we said, you know what? Let's ask the question in the room, how many people have been treated badly, or how many people have lost a child? And to our surprise, every single woman in the room raised her hand. So that's when we thought we need to do something about this. That's how we got involved. At that point in time, we came up with 3 policies. They were administrative policies. And I should say, I'm not a lawyer. This is all community driven. Those policies were about what to do with the woman when she loses a child on the maternity floor, labor and delivery, right? It was what training did healthcare professionals needed about how to treat women. And it was also how to create space for women, to create grieving spaces for women, and to create protocols and procedures for women who lost children. Because at that point, you were on your own.
Right.
Right? You didn't know, if you had to create a whole funeral situation because you were 20 weeks or more, or that fetus would disappear. So that is how the work of Black Women for Wellness was started. That was the roots.
Okay, great. Thank you. Wow. Kimberly.
I don't even know how to turn on
My mic now. There we go.
Good.
Well, hi everybody. It's really great to see everyone here. I'm Kimberly Durden. I'm a person who loves California. I've been here for 20 years, originally from the East Coast. I'm a mom of 6. I'm a grandmother of 5 and a half. I got one little boo-boo in the oven. My daughter-in-law is doing all that work. Thank you. And I'm a licensed midwife. I'm a retired lactation consultant of over 25 years. And I own a birth center in South LA called Kindred Space LA. And I invite you all to follow us on Instagram, on the internet. Kindred Space LA. And we are just now opening our second location in Lancaster, California, called Kindred Space AV. I own this business with my sister from another Mr. Allegra Hill, who's also a licensed midwife. So we co-own the center, and we opened prior to the pandemic, but we opened our birth center in the pandemic. And I guess personally, my first child, who will be 34 on Saturday, was born. I was living in Brooklyn at the time, and I always sought out midwifery. Like, I always knew I wanted a midwife. From a very small child, I remember reading Life magazine in my grandmother's living room and seeing the photo essay of Maud Collin. Does anybody know who that is? You all do. If you all don't know who Maud Collin is, look her up. MAUDECULLEN. And I saw these photographs of this elder Black woman taking care of moms in birth. But she was also taking care of the community. She was taking care of children. She was taking care of the elders. She was doing what traditional midwives have done since the beginning of time, really taking care of the community. She was the health care of the community. And, I didn't read into it that much when I was a kid, but I just knew, like, that's the kind of person I'm going to have when I have a baby. Like, I'm going to have a woman, like somebody who, I just want that wise woman. And so when I became pregnant with my first kid in 90, I looked in the yellow pages remember the yellow pages? I looked in the yellow pages like midwife. And they had one in there in Brooklyn. I signed up for midwifery care in Brooklyn, New York, and I started my first pregnancy with midwifery care, which was great. It was actually going really well. As I got closer to my due date, though, and actually when I went into labor, my baby was breech and coming butt first. And so I was like, okay, that's cool. Let's just do this. Let's have the baby. And they were like, oh, well, you know, we have to call the doctors in. And the doctors came in and said, well, you know, if her head gets stuck, that's it. And you don't have enough fluid, and you don't have this, and you don't have that. So basically, you're going to have a C-section today. I didn't even know what a C-section was. And no one in my family had ever had a C-section. And I remember going, like, looking in the waiting room of the clinic to find one of those pregnancy magazines and looking like C-section, and okay, and like, oh my God, like this is going to happen to me today. But I went on, had my baby. I don't consider that a traumatic experience for me. I felt taken care of. I wasn't prepared for major surgery, but we got through it, and that was that. But one thing I knew for sure is that I did not want to do that again, and that if I was to have another baby, that I did not want to be in the hospital. Did not know what that looked like, but I just I don't want to be in this hospital place. So when it came time to have my second child, about 3 years later, I started calling around birth centers in New York City, and I believe there was one at the time, and they were like, great, we'd love to sign you up. And I said, well, you know, I had a C-section with my last kid, and they were like, oh, wait, 1 second. We can't take women who've had prior C-sections. I said, why? Well, the midwives at this birth center said, we would love to care for you, but the doctors that back us up at St. Vincent's won't allow us to take women who've had prior abdominal surgery. So I was devastated. And then a friend of mine said, you know what, I know these midwives that deliver the babies in the house. And I was like, who does that, right? But give me their numbers. So the first one that I called was this beautiful woman named Tyoma Allison. I didn't call the other woman ever, because when I met Tyoma Allison and I started finding out what her story was and just everything about her and just her who she was and her vibe, I felt so safe, and I was like, that's my midwife. So I hired Tyoma, and I had my second baby at home in Brooklyn, New York, which was a fabulous experience. And I went on to have my third baby with Tyoma in New York, and then I moved to Northern Virginia, and I had no money, had a baby in the hospital, vaginal birth in the hospital in Virginia. It was okay. And fifth baby at home, sixth baby at home. My last baby was born in LA. I was 46 years old having my sixth baby at home.
Wow.
With midwives and
Wow.
my friends.
Wow.
And, you know, it was a fantastic experience. But all that to say, after my experience with Tyoma and my son, who was born in 1994, after giving birth to my son, seriously, like within 24 hours of giving birth, I said, I want to do this. I want to do this work. And I knew that it wasn't going to happen tomorrow. I had kids to raise. But I knew that it was for me, and that eventually I would do it. It wasn't until I became a lactation consultant eventually, and I've done a lot of work in maternal health over these past 30-something years, including, I think the first thing I started doing was hosting breastfeeding meetings. I know, you want me to stop? Yeah.
I could, no.
It's okay.
No.
I'll wrap it up. I just want to say that at the end of the day, it brought me and my business partner to opening up a birth center for folks, and that is currently the work we're doing in the world.
Thank you. I'm so entranced by these stories, and I think that they have so much to talk to, to inform us about why everyone is here, why we care about this. That it was really great to hear about your experiences. So for the next part of this, we're probably going to have to go somewhat faster. We've got a lot to cover. And so I want to start with Kiara, and if you can sort of just really fast, to the extent that it's possible to talk about constitutional law really fast. Can you talk about what exists in terms of protections for pregnant people, birthing people, newly birthed people, mothers, and what doesn't? I mean, in terms of just yeah.
So there is not a lot of law that speaks to obstetric violence, that speaks to the medical malpractice that you experienced, where a physician can prescribe you a medication that is not supposed to be used by pregnant folks, but nevertheless, there you were with a medication as a pregnant person. So there is not a lot of law in this area when it comes to constitutional claims, statutory claims. So what is left is tort claims. And so, yes, you can always bring medical malpractice, and that's what folks do. We're in LA right now. Kira Johnson was a black woman, if you don't know her story, perfectly healthy. I mean, she was a skydiver. She ran marathons. She spoke 5 different languages. She was pregnant. Her husband stood beside her, had a C-section, bled out 12 hours later after her husband repeatedly asked the team to care for her. And so in the absence of statutory protections, in the absence of constitutional protections, whether it's federal or state, her husband, Charles Johnson, had to rely on medical malpractice, and that's precisely what he did. And so with facing a lawsuit like that, hospitals, physicians are going to settle. And so people might have payouts. However, that settlement does not create precedent. It does not create a law upon which folks in the future can rely in order to prevent future harms. I'll also mention that it might be in the hospital's self-interest, right, to reform its practices in order to avoid future, settlements, future malpractice claims in the future, but it might not, right? It might just be a cost of business that they're willing to sustain, especially if you have an insurance claim that you can write this off to. So that explains sort of why we don't, or that explains the law that exists. I'll just mention briefly that the reason that we don't have a robust statutory or constitutional framework for obstetric violence, for medical malpractice, I think we have to go back to RJ 101. And RJ 101 says that the reason that abortion has sort of been a black hole of attention, why we dedicate so many resources to fighting for abortion rights, constitutionalizing abortion rights, getting a federal statutory abortion right, is that is the reproductive oppression that shows up in the lives of affluent cis white women. And so all those other reproductive injustices, all those other reproductive oppressions that are visited upon those who lack the privilege of gender identity or race or class or nationality or ability, those things get obscured as reproductive injustice. So we have a whole bunch of abortion law, and hopefully we'll get some more in the future. But I hope that with RJ's sort of ubiquity, its proliferation, it's becoming a vocabulary and a framework through which we think that we'll start also thinking about creating law so that we can protect against the reproductive oppressions that show up in the lives of those without privilege.
Okay, great. Thank you. I want to ask actually Farah next. So to talk a little bit more based on, you talked about some of the experiences that you had and you saw that brought you to the work, but maybe a couple of cases that you have worked on really quickly that kind of illustrate like the particular lack of rights or particular problems. I know there's one. There's a lot, I know, but one you just filed today. So maybe we're all familiar probably with the case of Adriana Smith, who's the Georgia woman who's been kept alive on life support for several months. Take it away, Farah.
Yeah, so I'm not going to start there because I'm a contrarian. Sorry, Nina. No, okay, the place I want to start actually is with a client who came to us because the hospital that she was going to deliver at, like within a matter of weeks, had said, if you don't consent in advance to a repeat cesarean, we're going to call the family regulation system and have your children taken away, the existing children you have and the one that you're about to give birth to. We're going to institute a proceeding to force you to undergo the surgery, and if you don't consent to it, we're just going to do it anyway. And so we went to court to try to get a restraining order to prevent the hospital from doing this, and the court came back and was like, oh no, you can't force a hospital to do a procedure that they don't want to do. But you can force a human being to I know. Well, this is the frankly, a vaginal delivery isn't a procedure. It's telling them, go get your catcher's mitt because this baby's coming, right? But what they were doing was essentially turning it around and saying that she was incorrectly and improperly trying to force people to do a procedure that they didn't want to do. And in terms of the sort of the tort alignment of these things, speaking to that hospital's counsel, he told me point blank, I would rather defend the battery suit if you guys come back and file one than if something goes wrong with that baby. So that was a pretty stark, in terms of what would happen if somebody tried to get a suit or tried to file a suit for their rights in a civil court. Leaving people sort of to their own devices in civil courts hasn't gotten us very far. And I say that even knowing that there have been, I learned a lot from a lawyer early on who was like, anesthesia has changed so much, the practice of the medicine of anesthesia, because of torts that people filed. And yet, this ends up being sort of when there's a fetus involved, frankly, when it's a person who is pregnant, all of that kind of goes out the window. So the other case that Nina was referring to it's happening right now. So frankly, the denial of people's autonomy and their ability to make decisions about their own bodies, they continue to have that removed from them even when they are dead. And so we have filed a lawsuit along with our partners at Compassion and Choices, challenging Kansas's pregnancy exclusion to their advance directive policy. So in general, in most places, people have a right to say in advance what they want done, what procedures they will accept or decline in the event that they become terminally ill and unable to communicate for themselves. And they can say, I want life-saving care. I want life-saving care withdrawn. I want to designate this person as a proxy to make decisions for me. Right? That is the normal course of events. But in 9 states, if a person is pregnant, that is automatically invalidated. The state does not provide, it doesn't really give instructions to healthcare providers as to what they're supposed to do. We see the effect of this, what's going on right now in Georgia with Adriana Smith, whose body, she is dead. Her body is being kept on life support to continue to gestate a fetus, and her family was not given the option. They were not given the ability to make that decision. And they from what they have said to media, they want to try to save the baby, but they also said they didn't have the ability to make that decision. And so that stripping people of the ability to make that decision or to even designate somebody who could make those decisions on their own behalf is it's a blatant form of discrimination that most people don't even know is something that could happen to them, that if they become incapacitated. And when we think about, who faces the most risk during pregnancy in this country, right, who is most likely to end up in a situation where they would need an advance directive to be put into effect, right, we see yet again the racially disproportionate impact of laws that strip people of their ability to make decisions about their bodies. So that was just filed today. Our client, if we can just all think happy thoughts for our client who is so pregnant and probably delivering today or tomorrow. Even in death, people who are pregnant lose the ability to make decisions about their bodies.
Hillary, you also have recently filed a really interesting lawsuit involving midwifery in Hawaii. Can you talk about, I guess, that against the framework of reproductive autonomy, which was a really interesting concept that I think we'll be hearing a lot more about over the next day, but also just hopefully in the world soon.
Yeah, so kind of in thinking about rebuilding reproductive rights, we've been trying to be informed by the human rights framework, by the reproductive justice framework, and say, this is a right beyond abortion. So that's a key part of the right to reproductive autonomy. It's a right to make decisions about if, when, how, with whom to give birth and parent and all those sort of full spectrum of reproductive decisions. And when I say informed by human rights law, I think kind of a good shorthand for that is understanding state action and the government's obligations in a much broader way than current U.S. constitutional law does. So, U.S. constitutional law has a very negative framing, which sort of comes most close to the respect framework in human rights. So states must refrain from interfering with people's rights. But human rights law also says there is an obligation of the government to protect individuals against rights violations, not only by the government, but also by third parties, like hospitals and healthcare providers, et cetera. And the government has an obligation to fulfill those rights, so must take positive measures to ensure those rights are actually real. That's in contrast, for example, to the U.S. Supreme Court's decisions about the Hyde Amendment saying that Medicaid coverage doesn't need to include abortion coverage because there's something different about funding a right versus an actual barrier to the right, which is, of course, not a real distinction in people's lives. The legal analysis for the right to reproductive autonomy should be intersectional, and that to the extent courts are looking at history, they should look at how history has been used to oppress, and that the goal is to build forward, not use history to freeze us in time. Again, sort of like the Dobbs decision did. So that's sort of the very shorthand on reproductive autonomy, but the Hawaii case that Nina mentioned, we are challenging a midwifery restriction scheme that, for people who are familiar with TRAP laws, so targeted regulation of abortion providers, there are very similar laws that apply to midwives and birth centers that restrict who can be a midwife, what they can do, where they can do it, which again, like abortion restrictions, restricts the pregnant person's decisions about where and with whom they can birth, because of course a care provider, as we've heard sort of throughout this discussion already, has an incredible impact, whether positive or negative, on a person's entire pregnancy and birth experience. So for many, many years, Hawaii had essentially no restrictions on midwives. They had a licensing scheme for nurse midwives, but everyone else could sort of practice as they had been practicing for generations. The state enacted a licensure law that defined midwifery very broadly, so essentially criminalized anyone who was providing advice, information, or care during pregnancy, and then set very restrictive and narrow criteria for how to get a license. We, in particular, heard really troubling stories from Black and Native Hawaiian midwives and the families they served, because this law took away the ability of their providers, some of the providers who were the only ones willing to go to remote areas to support people with traditional birthing practices or to support people to birth on their ancestral lands. We brought a lawsuit with the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation, the only legal organization sort of dedicated to Native Hawaiian rights, as well as the law firm Perkins Coie, to say this law violates the state constitution's protections for reproductive autonomy and also violates a specific provision of the Hawaii Constitution that requires affirmative protections for Native Hawaiian traditional and customary practices. So I will say, you can talk to folks in this room. We have one of our clients, our plaintiff, Esne Dawson, who is a licensed midwife in Hawaii, and Nicole Arthen, who is an expert in our case. So at the reception, you can chat with them later. I will say, after a 4-day hearing where both of them testified, we got a partial win from the court. The judge found that the law did violate that protection for Native Hawaiian rights and blocked the state from enforcing the law against Native Hawaiians practicing, teaching, or learning Native Hawaiian traditional birthing practices, because the judge really understood sort of the connection between the cultural significance of the decisions around birth and the criminalization of care providers and the risk of eradicating traditional practices, but she denied our broader reproductive autonomy claim, framing it as there's no right to an unlicensed practitioner, which is not what we were arguing for. We were arguing from the perspective of the pregnant person to make these culturally significant and personal decisions. So there was some legislative action this year that, again, incrementally fixes the law, that provides additional paths to licensure and affirms the Native Hawaiian protections, but still leaves out sort of broader protections to just decide where and with whom to birth and not criminalize those providers. So there's more work to do, but I think it has been, right, litigation can sometimes win in court, but there's also a huge kind of public education and storytelling opportunity because litigation gets a lot of attention. And so our ability through our clients and experts to just share information and also show, like, here are midwives who are experts in maternal health, I think has advanced the ball on a lot of this work in positive ways.
Thank you. Wow. Kimberly, I want to ask you next. So, sort of, you are on the ground in the room in the home, or do you do home births? What is it? What's the reality in California, or maybe it's this part of California even, for your clients? Why they come to you, but also what you are able to do as a midwife and maybe not able to do. Some states, there's a lot of states that have very severe restrictions on midwifery, and others are better. And where does California fit in? And what does that still mean that you sometimes can't do, maybe?
Well, California kind of seems like a good place to do midwifery. Community midwifery is one of the things we're calling it, which is basically at a hospital birth. So home births, we have a birth center. Folks come to our birth center and birth there. In terms of, there's different types of midwives. So California recognizes licensed midwives, which that is the designation that I have, and also certified nurse midwives. In terms of traditional midwives, they are kind of underground, but overall, when you look at other states where community midwifery or out-of-hospital birth is not even legal, we can do this legally. People come to us many times because they've had a very bad experience. They've had a traumatic experience. Maybe even their baby was born healthy, but they are scarred. And they also feel that when they go into what I call mainstream care, I do not call OB care traditional care. It is not traditional, okay? It's not. It's just mainstream. It's brand new. And people have this experience in mainstream care of repeatedly I hear people say, I don't feel like I was listened to. I'm not able to bring my partner. I'm not able to bring my kids, especially when COVID. They don't feel like they're getting answers, and they don't feel like they're getting good care. They feel like they're a number. They're being treated like a number. And so what they come to us for is autonomy, to be able to birth however they would like, under the watchful eye of their midwives and the midwifery team and doulas. We encourage them to have doulas. So if they have doulas, that's really lovely for extra support. They come to us, they want a chance. They're scared, honestly. They're scared of giving birth in the hospital, especially if they're folks of color. And the truth of the matter is, Allegra and I opened the birth center thinking, probably all of our clients will be people of color. But we serve everybody. Everybody comes to us. And we love that. But in particular, people of color are very scared of dying. They're very scared of dying. They're very scared that they're going to go to the hospital and they're going to die. And then they do all the right things, right? Like they sign up for care with a doctor or whatever. And then as they experience the care, they're horrified. They're mortified because as Farah mentioned or spoke about her story, that I hear that story all day, every day from people who are looking to birth outside of the hospital. The thing that makes, and one thing I don't want to forget to say is that it always strikes me that I was just at a birth this morning, and I realized I have all this stuff on my shirt, and I was splashed with as her baby was emerging and our student midwife was catching and I was supporting, and I was splashed with the water from the birth tub on my dress. So I feel like I've been, blessed with holy water today. And I did not have time to change before I came here, so I apologize. But what always strikes me, and this couple in particular is their third baby, 2 babies in the hospital. They had healthy babies, but wanted a different experience. And what always tickles me is when we start getting closer to the birth, like this particular father said to me when I was in the prenatal with him last week, he's like, where am I allowed to be? Where am I allowed to be when she's giving birth? And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, like, where should I be? Am I allowed to be next to her? These are the things, it breaks my heart inside. People are always asking, what are they allowed to do at their birth? Am I allowed to eat in labor if I want to? And things like that. And I said, so that's the energy of birthing in America. You have people are going to tell you what you can and cannot do, and you just deal with it. So what else can I say?
That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah,
I'll leave it
thank
at
you.
that for now.
And that's a great segue, actually, to Jeanette. You, through your organization, your networks, you do a lot of policy work in California. You've been really, California, again, sort of has the reputation of having, better birth or maternal health initiatives than a lot of other places. I don't know if that reputation is deserved. You can speak to that, or if it's deserved for everybody, if it's deserved for, affluent white women in San Francisco versus low-income women of color in the Central Valley. But so what are you doing, and kind of what has California recently either done in terms of the momnibus, and I guess these are 3 questions. What else needs to still happen? And you have 5 minutes.
No, listen, I have a lot to say in that regard. Let me see.
We'll all have these conversations to be continued over wine. Thinking.
So I will say it is always good to have a good PR agent. Right. And California has a good PR agent.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Right. And what California kind of hides a little bit, it took us, I want to say 30 years to get data from California about births, about infant and maternal mortality and morbidity, about the near misses. So we have this report called Centering Black Mothers, and it took legislation to get the data. Right?
Wow.
So, and then when we got the data, it went to California Department of Health Services, and it took them 4 years to frame the data and take it through their bureaucracy so it could be released. So that's what I'm saying. It is good to have a good PR agent, because then you can hide all your data. And you can develop a reputation. So just like we named Kara, we can name April Valentine.
Right, that all died in California.
We can name Bridget Comer. We can name, and that's like troubling in terms of we can name folks who have died giving birth in California. We did pass Black Women for Wellness in coalition with other community-based organizations, passed a policy called the Dignity in Pregnancy and Childbirth Act. The Dignity in Pregnancy and Childbirth Act asks that perinatal staff be trained with implicit bias training, trying to attack the racism that is experienced in California. Well, when April Valentine died at Centinela, we found that less than 17% of the hospitals had actually did the training.
Right.
So we went back with, and this is where it is good, where community-based organizations have relationship with attorneys in terms of the Attorney General, Rob Bonta. He sent a letter to the hospitals and said, this is a law. You need to do the implicit bias training. So now it's up 80%. But you know what? We still are facing the racism or the implicit bias that comes with giving birth in a hospital. That's why women are scared, right? They're scared of what happens because they're scared they give up their power.
Right.
Right. One of the things we talked about, or you talked about, was autonomy. And we use these terms like, what is reproductive justice and how is that different than reproductive rights or reproductive health or autonomy, and what does that mean? And why is it that we had this huge fight around abortion but didn't include the other intersecting issues, something as simple as giving birth, with that fight, right? So that's what we're talking about in California at this point in time. And now it's going to get even scarier. 33%, and I think that's a low estimate, of women who give birth or people who give birth in California are on Medi-Cal. So what does that say? Especially because come January 26, there are no enrollees, no new enrollees. Right? So one of the things that happens that I have noticed, and maybe you could tell me different, the folks who go to birthing centers are financially stable. Right?
Yeah.
They can afford a midwife. There are so many folks in California, and it's going to be more, who cannot afford the type of prenatal care. And then if we think about, some of the superstars who gave babies here, who had babies here, they didn't get the care that they needed.
Right.
Right? At the hospital. Because once again, when you go to a hospital, your birth, which is something natural, becomes medicalized.
Right.
And when it becomes medicalized, you give away your power.
Right.
So part of the Momnibus bill, which is different than the dignity in childbirth.
Okay, that's the other name. Okay.
No, it's
part
two,
of it. It's two of them. Okay.
It's two bills,
Okay.
right? And so one of the things that we did, just in terms of the insidiousness of the system, the Momnibus bill called for doulas to get paid, so folks could have a doula. Our community-based organization has a field team that does door knocking and canvassing. We went out, did door knocking and canvassing, and said, guess what, you can have a doula, it's covered by Medi-Cal, and 87% of the people said, what's a doula? Right? So that's where we combine what community knows, and how do we inform community what new laws are happening, right? So, but what we didn't plan for and what was really needed was, how then do we organize doulas so they get paid, right? Because that was part of that law too.
Right.
How do doulas get paid? And there was supposed to be a stakeholders group to help create that situation so they would get paid. Part of that law also said we're going to open up the pipeline for midwives. Right, so we can get more folks into the pipeline for midwives. First thing UCSF does is says, well, to be a midwife now, you have to have a PhD.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So that went way, it's like, okay, that sets up a whole different situation. So we asked for data. We asked for the open up the pipeline, and then, so we open up the pipeline over here and they close it off over there in terms of that. There were other things that happened with the Momnibus bill also, and part of it was a guaranteed income, right? Abundant Birth Project. So now we have a lawsuit, right? And the lawsuit says that we're discriminating because we offer people at risk a guaranteed income to help manage or mitigate the stress that comes along with being a pregnant person in California, looking at the racism and sexism and living at that intersection, right? So we have to work with language on a regular basis about how do we make this happen. The guaranteed income program, we had enough funding in California, in Los Angeles County, to do 400 women.
Wow.
3,000 applied.
Yeah.
So our question now becomes, what do we do with those women who are not part of the program, right? Do we offer them doulas? Do we find them coaches? How do we get resources for those women? So when laws are passed or when policy is passed, it's a good thing. But the part of, I have envy of Hawaii because of the traditional laws that they have in place, or the traditional practices that they have in place that we can't say in California in terms of that whole traditional thing. But Hawaii set that up. But when we pass laws here, then we have to look at the culture And then we have to look at the other institutions like academia who then influence or stifle the laws that are passed. But one of the things I say, living as a black woman in America, the laws are working perfectly. They weren't meant for us. Black women were a commodity. And in some places, still are treated like that. I'm sure that that woman in Atlanta right now, that her family feels like she's a commodity.
Thank you for that. This has been such a great conversation. Thank you to my fellow panelists. I can hardly wait to hear you talk more about all of this and more over wine and tomorrow. I guess I'm wondering if anybody has, like, here briefly, if any of you wants to sort of, if there's like a call to action, I guess, for the people in the room. If you have any thoughts about, like, what people who are listening here care about this, what they can do, what they should do, briefly.
I just want to say something really quickly, because you mentioned, Jan, that people who have money can have access to out-of-hospital care, et cetera. And that is true for the most part. And I just want to say, for our center, we always knew that we were going to be serving Medi-Cal population, and we actually wanted to be able to take Medi-Cal and have people pay, use Medi-Cal to pay for their care. But what we found out was that there was no way we could stay in business taking Medi-Cal. Mm-hmm. Like, Medi-Cal will put us out of business yesterday. So we took a risk and decided we would not take any insurances. Folks with private insurance, or what we call the good insurance, which is ridiculous that we say good or bad. They will likely get reimbursements from their insurance. But what we've done, and my call to action, is to please fund birth centers, please fund midwives, please fund midwifery school for folks, because these are things that are not covered. And we are doing this. We keep Kindred Space LA's doors open through grant funding, through organizations, all different types of organizations that want to support good care for families. And this helps us keep our costs. Sometimes people don't have to pay anything if we have good funding. Thank you.
I just want to add, only because the last couple of points have touched directly on my forthcoming book, Expecting Inequity, early 2026. You guys can but one of the punchlines of the book is, so I have spent 2 years sort of talking to and observing wealthy Black people, and they do everything right. They really do. They have the good insurance, and they go to the good hospitals, and they purchase the doula care, and they go to their appointments, and they have like printouts of all the questions that they need to ask, and they never take their wedding rings off, even though their hands are swollen in pregnancy, because they don't want the providers to think that they are unmarried, and they wear their Yale sweatshirts to telegraph that they are. And they do all of these things. They have their husbands right beside them. He's got his wedding ring on too, right? And they do all of these things in order to survive birth. And it struck me as they shouldn't have to do that. It struck me as like that is what the neoliberal project that's the solution that the neoliberal project proposes, is that the government doesn't have the responsibility to provide just basic health care. Instead, you have to purchase survival in the market. And so, yes, right, we should fund, get people through midwifery school and, fund birth centers, but it's not our job. What we need to do is to get a government in place that actually provides for the citizens and residents, that the whole point of the government existing, at least that's what I think government is for. It's not to create a robust market. Instead, the government exists in order to care for its citizens and residents.
Yeah, I think you are absolutely right in that. It is the responsibility of government to care for the people who live under the governance of it. And I thought about what Melissa said when she opened it. I thought about my 3-year-old grandson. And the saying was, when he acts out, that's when he's having a developmental bridge that he's doing. So right now, this government is acting out, right? So perhaps we can take advantage of this moment and let it develop into something that is of benefit for the people who live in this place, right? So that's what I'm hopeful for, that in this moment of this act out, that folks are energized and engaged to embrace government and hold them accountable for what is the right, moral, ethical, just thing to do, right? And part of that is providing more than adequate but quality health care for the people who live here.
The richest nation in the world, right?
Mm-hmm. It costs the most to have a baby. It's cheaper for the royals to have babies in England than it is here. And part of that conversation also, in terms of what we can do, is really look at the difference between private and public hospitals, right? So when April Valentine died at Centinela, I'll try to wrap this quick.
Sorry.
Bonta did the investigation that found the hospital negligent, right? And fined them $75,000. And what they did was close the maternity ward, right? And we had many community conversations about, well, what, they get to close, right? Because that meant there was no place for women to labor and deliver or receive the well-woman care they needed within, 17 miles, right? In LA traffic, right? So the nearest hospital was Martin Luther King Jr. Community Hospital. I said the whole name because community hospital means that it did not have the major services that they needed should someone need neonatal care or something like that. Right? So then the next hospital was a Catholic hospital. So a Catholic hospital has their own set of rules about what they will or will not do, directed by the Pope. More likely the Council of Bishops, right, who are here, who give all type of advice, influence, and impact to U.S. representatives. So part of what we can do is know the chain of command. Who's speaking to whom, right? Who's the Council of Bishops influencing? Where's the Catholic hospital? And what can we do about them to hold them accountable for the community that they live and say that they serve in as a nonprofit, government receiving funds entity? So there's plenty for us to do. And I have a list of the policies that we're
Okay, great. So there we go. I'm going to probably say thank you. We're over time by quite a lot, but it was worth it, I think. No, thank you for... No,
We just got started.
7:30?
Oh, I get it.
Thank you all for coming and for the panelists.